Hold tight hustlers, in this video I'm going to talk you through a 9-step process for creating tight radio ready mixes that translate on any system. Sometimes you can go round in circles, endlessly twiddling and ultimately ruining your mix. This approach will keep you focused, making mixing quicker as well as delivering head nodding outcomes on any system. Step 1. Clean up. Before you start to blend anything, you must make sure everything is clean. That means no pops, clicks, mouth noises in vocals. Temper the breaths in vocals to your musical taste. No unwanted noise. Re-record any dodgy recordings. Make sure the timing's all good and that there are no phase issues from, say, multiple microphones on drums or dimension effects on synths. Step 2. Gain staging. The next step is to set everything to the right gain before processing. If you use plugins that model old hardware, anything from waves for example, you want to make sure that all channels before processing are peaking at about -18 dBFS. This is the sweet spot they've been designed to work for, so you'll get the best possible sound. You can do this by applying a utility plugin, then eyeballing the peaks in the channel fader and adjusting the gain on the utility plugin accordingly. Do not use the channel fader, as the further from zero you go, the lower the resolution, making it harder to make small changes. If turning the utility plugin down makes some things too quiet, you can always up the output gain on the plugin, or use another utility plugin after to turn the volume back up. If you don't use analog modeling plugins, the specific level doesn't matter too much, so long as there's no red lining. However, be mindful that you'll want the combination of tracks to be no higher than -6 decibels on the master, so I'd recommend individual tracks peaking no higher than -10 decibels. Once everything's set to the right level, run a quick check across all the channels and make sure there's no clipping. Don't forget to check the master bus too. If the master is clipping, you'll need to reduce the gain somewhere. If there's already a volume balance that you want to preserve, you can knock a few decibels off all of the channels, or if there's no clipping on any other channel, you can apply a utility plugin to the master and turn down the gain as needed. You'll need to check the gain throughout your mix at each stage of the processing. Clipping may not be audible to you, but it sucks headroom and will muddy the sound. This will result in a poor quality, quiet master. Step 3. Volume balance. Step 3 is the most important, so make sure you take some time here. It's important because once you have the volume balance, you'll be volume matching the changes you make in subsequent steps to maintain this balance. Start by thinking about what tracks you want this track to sound like. Pick a reference track with the vibe you want and a similar instrumentation. I cannot stress enough how useful reference tracks are. Use them. I'll be doing a video on how to use them very soon. Once you have your reference tracks in place, start with the key elements, the vocal, the kick, the snare, the bass, and bring up their volume to match that element in the reference one at a time in solo. Do this across all elements until you have a rough balance. If you've mixed as you've created the track, you might want to drop everything to silence first and then start again from scratch. Be sure to take a break to give your ears a rest before making the final tweaks. At this point your mix will sound a bit muddy and lack clarity, but that's okay, the next steps will take care of that. Step 4. Dynamics. It's time to make those drums pop, that vocal up close and personal, that bass nice, smooth and controlled, glue all those tracks together, etc. Where needed, apply your compressors and other dynamic range processing tools. Just remember to adjust the output gain to match the volume before processing to maintain that balance you created in the previous step. There's loads of ways to use compressors, so check out my separate video on this. The link will be in the description. Step 5. EQ. There are two main uses for EQ. You can EQ for tone and EQ for separation. You might want to use a separate plugin for each of these functions and name them appropriately so you know when you're looking back at the mix that you've created. Start by shaping the tone. Does it need to be brighter? Add a few dBs to everything over 2K if it does. Is it muddy? Perhaps a thin cut in the 300 to 500 Hz range? And is it boomy? Well, maybe you should lower some of those bass frequencies. I often do this in solo just so I can make sure I'm starting from a sound I really like. But please note, it may sound very different when placed into the context of the mix. Any changes you make to the EQ balance will have an impact on volume, so use the bypass and engage buttons and adjust the gain to volume match the process sound to what it was before. On to separation. Now it's time to start separating everything out and making it all sound great. But before diving in at this stage, you need to think about where you want everything to sit in the mix, as the next few stages are all interlinked. You've got 3 dimensions to work with. Low to high, what sits on top of what? That's your arrangement and your EQ. Left to right, that's your panning. And near to far, what sounds close and what sounds in the background. And you use depth effects like reverb and delay for that. This step is all about that first dimension, low to high. So take a look at this. This is the frequency spectrum. And this shows where different instruments sit on the frequency spectrum, or at least where most of their tone sits. It's important because instruments that sit in different parts of the spectrum will need less EQ to sit together nicely. For example, the bass and the guitar. Those in the same part of the frequency spectrum, however, will likely need more EQ. So if you've got 2 guitars, for example. From this image, you can see that actually there's a lot of crossover and you won't be able to get away with much. Where channels clash, you want to boost in certain frequencies and then cut in the same frequency in the other channel. Boost should be wide, have a low Q, and cuts should be thin, have a high Q. And 1 to 3 decibels of change tends to do the trick. There are no rules on what frequencies to use, so I recommend sweeping a small boost, maybe 2 decibels, across the full spectrum until you really capture the part of the tone that you want to stand out from that particular instrument. Invest some time in the sub 150 Hz range, because this range is quite difficult to hear, and also invest time in the 300 to 500 Hz range, as this range tends to have the most challenging crossovers. Filter out as much as you can here without making your track sound thin and lifeless. My top tip is to check in mono, as that can be a really good way to see if you've created the right level of separation. To be honest, you can even do the EQ exercise in mono and then tweak it in stereo. Mono's a lot less forgiving, so if you can make it sound good in mono, it will sound amazing in stereo. Before moving on, bypass and engage to check your moves haven't changed the volume. You'll want to preserve that volume balance, so make sure you change the gain appropriately. Step 6. Panning. This step addresses the second dimension of separation, left to right. For this stage, simply pan to your chosen spot in the 3D field. Check your decisions on speakers, as headphones provide a warped stereo image due to no crosstalk. Crosstalk is where information from the right side also reaches the left ear, and information from the left side also reaches the right ear. Headphones therefore exaggerate the effect of the panning decision that you've made, so they must be checked on speakers or on a speaker emulation plugin such as Abbey Road's 3x Waves. If you've got live instruments, you might want to think about how the band would be organised on stage and then pan accordingly. That said, low end should always be kept central. Bass, kick and even snare are usually dead centre, as they are the core rhythm of the track. You may even wish to flatten anything under the 350 Hz region into mono to keep it all central. Depth effects. Now it's time for how close or how far the third dimension of that separation. More reverb and delay will push a track back in the mix and less will make it sound closer. Remember to bypass and engage to check your moves haven't changed the volume. Again, you want to preserve that initial volume balance. You can also use reverb and delay to make everything feel like it was done in the same room. Consider adding reverb to a return track and sending a small amount of each of your channels to that return. This glues a track together nicely and makes it sound live and authentic. I recommend filtering out the lower frequencies and possibly even the higher frequencies too, just to make sure that the sound is nice and clear. Step 8. Give it some shine. By this point, everything should be sounding nice and clear with its own spot in the mix. Now it's time to spice things up if it's needed. Saturation's a great tool at this point, as it can warm up a mix and create some extra clarity, while also gluing the track together nicely, as it does tend to add a little bit of light compression. Equally, you might want to apply some EQ to the master bus at this stage to just give the track a certain timbre, or perhaps compression or multiband compression to glue it together, and maybe even some stereo width just to add some extra spice and widen out the track. And finally, step 9, the final touches. This is just doing any final tweaks. This might be things like volume automation to ensure that build-ups and drops land with the right level of bang. Before you bounce down for mastering, just check that the master bus is peaking no higher than -3 to -6 decibels. This is to ensure there's enough headroom for a really good quality master. If there's only a few peaks that go over that, a limiter on a very light setting can do the trick. If there are more, try taking a decibel off every channel just to maintain the mix. Repeat until done. This process isn't always linear. Sometimes you'll jump back and forth from 4 to 9, and I cannot stress how important it is to use at least one reference track, maybe even more. It will help you get that volume balance right and ensure you don't underdo or overdo the bass or treble frequencies. I really hope you find this useful. This is my process, it's not the only one, so find whatever works for you. I believe learning can be swift and that the real magic is in the time spent practicing and creating. With that in mind, my videos are short, simple and to the point, so you can spend less time learning and more time making the music you love. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification button to ensure you're informed when a video is hot off the press. Keep hustling.